Malaysian Airlines 370, also known as MH370, was a Boeing 777 that was scheduled for a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8, 2014. It had started off as a normal day for Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah and co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid. Captain Shah had clocked in about 18,400 hours throughout his 33-year career, 23 as captain. First Officer Hamid had clocked in about 2,800 hours and was just finishing his training. This flight was supposed to be his final one to becoming First Officer of Boeing 777 flights and will have continued flying for Malaysian Airlines. The aircraft was also carrying an additional 10 crew members and 227 passengers from 14 nations, most of whom were Chinese citizens. Among these, 5 of them were children. This was scheduled to be a 5.5-hour flight, but had additional fuel to last 7 hours in case of emergencies or diversions. It took off as planned from Kuala Lumpur at 12:42 a.m. Malaysian time and was cleared to gain altitude to 35,000 feet. First Officer Hamid was the pilot flying the plane, while Captain Shah was the pilot monitoring controls. Despite offbeat radios to air traffic control by Captain Shah, such as radioing in that the plane had reached altitude rather than leaving at one, everything being reported to air traffic control by the captain alluded to as normal. Departing the Malaysian airspace, the plane's final signal was sent at 1:06 a.m. Malaysian time, along with the final verbal signal from Captain Shah prior to its transition to air traffic control in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam.
370, we are ready, requesting flight number 350 to Beijing.
Malaysian 370 is headed to Beijing via People's Alpha departure, 6,000 feet, squawk 2157.
Beijing, People's Alpha, 6,000, squawk 2157. Malaysian 370, thank you.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Everything about the transition seemed normal, with no signs of distress. However, the ATC and Ho Chi Minh were also supposed to get a verbal signal indicating entry into Vietnamese airspace, but that was never received from the pilots. Several attempts were made by the ATC in Vietnam to ensure that clearance is granted to this plane. At 1:30 a.m., another nearby aircraft sent a signal in an attempt to contact the crew of MH370, but the captain of that flight was unable to make contact, instead hearing mumbling and static in return. After crossing into Vietnamese airspace, the transponder disappeared off the screens of the Kuala Lumpur ATC, the assumption being that the plane was accepted into Vietnamese airspace. At this point, it was realized by the ATC in Ho Chi Minh that MH370 did not check in and called Kuala Lumpur ATC. The flight was caught on radar but then disappeared at 1:21 a.m. However, it was still shown on military radar until 2:22 a.m. at an altitude of 29,000 feet near Penang Airport. The flight path showed that the plane was turning right but then beginning a left turn southwest. Then at 2:25 a.m., the aircraft's satellite system sends a logon request, basically a handshake by the satellite telecommunications company Inmarsat. This allowed them to pinpoint the plane's location. After logging on, the system then sends a response as an hourly status report, but there were 2 ground-to-aircraft phone calls that were left unanswered. At 8:19 a.m., the flight sends its final logon request, almost 2 hours after it was supposed to land in Beijing, which was acknowledged by ground control. However, when the final status request was sent, there was no response. The Air Traffic Control Center in Ho Chi Minh then contacted Air Traffic Control in Kuala Lumpur for a status check on MH370 after they were unable to obtain verbal communication from the plane. Upon further investigation, it was shown at the control center that the plane was in Cambodian airspace. With this information, both the Ho Chi Minh and the Kuala Lumpur ATCs, along with Singapore and Chinese ATCs, were in constant communication in an effort to locate the aircraft. These jurisdictions went back and forth trying to establish a connection to the flight. They were able to contact a nearby Malaysian Airlines plane, who also tried to locate the lost aircraft to no avail. There were many conflicting reports as to the last known location of the plane as these events unfolded. There was no distress signal from the aircraft, and it was a clear early morning. There were no technical problems prior to the aircraft vanishing from radar screens, and according to meteorologists, skies were clear and there was nothing in the forecast to have suggested any storms. Back on the ground, Malaysian Airlines officials were met with concerned family members of the passengers on board. These passengers will have been waiting for hours for any sort of information as to where the plane was and when it was expected to land. They were put in a small room and were told to just wait and information would be relayed. According to the relatives of the passengers, no such information was ever relayed to them. Many of them stormed out in rage, while others continued waiting desperately for answers. Communication was also a huge barrier, as many of these people didn't understand what was being told. At 7:24, almost an hour after the flight was supposed to land, Malaysian Airlines issued a media statement that the flight was lost on radar, and they were doing everything they can to find out what exactly had happened and to re-establish communications. On March 24, 2014, the Prime Minister of Malaysia issued a statement regarding the incident after being briefed by the Air Accidents Investigation Branch and Inmarsat, the satellite data provider who had tried to establish communication with the lost aircraft. They concluded that the aircraft must have crashed into the Indian Ocean based on the trajectory and as there were no other places it could have landed based on the projected flight path and the fuel that had remained. With this information, at 10 p.m. Malaysian time, an emergency meeting was held with the relatives of the passengers. They were told that the mission had failed and the aircraft indeed had been lost, fearing no survivors. This information was told in person in that small room, with media also hounding the relatives. However, many of them also received this news through phone calls and text messages. Immediately after the story broke, a search mission had commenced to find the aircraft. Based on its last known location and trajectory, it was decided that the search would begin in the southern Indian Ocean. From March 18th to the 28th, military personnel from different countries joined in the search and covered about 1.8 million square miles, with no finding as to what had happened to the flight or where it was. Officials first began with military radar in hopes that the plane was still on or over land somewhere in Asia. This search was a bust, and was ended rather quickly when it was realized a couple days later that it might have crashed into the ocean. They then shifted to using underwater locator beacons to search the ocean for pings, which they did pick up on twice on April 6, 2014. The first one lasting for about 2 hours and 20 minutes, and the second one lasting approximately 13 minutes. They initially were believed to have been from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, also known as the black box. These are now painted orange to aid in the discovery of them should an aircraft crash or go missing. These record the operating data and the conversations happening in the cockpit. However, this retrieval mission failed as they were not able to obtain anything from the ocean, which led investigators to believe that these were not the black boxes they were looking for. This search eventually became a dead end as they didn't find anything. Time was now officially running out in finding the black boxes as the batteries were dying. When planes go down, these black boxes hold the answer as to what happened to the aircraft, so finding it becomes first priority. Search parties and officials reconvened to figure out next steps. This is when they started using sonar to search the ocean floor for anything they can find. This was completed on May 20th, 2014, after 30 deployments and no evidence found. Their next step was to switch over to conducting a bathymetric survey, which is an oceanographic mapping of the search area. Officials had mapped 80,000 square miles of the ocean floor search area until December 17, 2014, when they then made the switch to an underwater search and partnered up with Phoenix International, an Australian marine group who helped to find various other plane crashes in the ocean. There were many other companies that joined in the search, lasting for about 3 years with halts throughout due to the weather. The southern Indian Ocean is one of the deadliest places with the most dangerous weather patterns in the world. By January 2017, 46,000 square miles were searched and was completed, and they finally suspended the search after not finding anything of evidence. This search effort ended up being one of the costliest search missions in aviation history. They did, however, find some debris near Reunion Island off the coast in Africa, which was confirmed to be part of the aircraft during that time, but it wasn't enough to determine what had happened to the plane and where the rest of it was. In fact, 20 pieces were found during the search. With resources running low and budgets dwindling, it was later resumed by private companies along with the Malaysian government. However, even that search effort ended with no success. Here, they realized that the plane could have crashed in a general area based on how much fuel the plane had left and the trajectory the plane was headed, along with altitude shifts. Since small pieces of the plane were found, there have been since numerous reports of other debris being found near Reunion Island, such as the flaperon. This piece was thoroughly researched and was positively confirmed to be a part of the missing plane after French authorities were able to retrieve a serial number that corresponded to that plane. Eventually, parts from the right stabilizer and the wing were recovered, which was then also identified, however not 100% confirmed to be pieces of the missing plane. Events like these are no stranger to people that become immersed in conspiracies and others who just want answers. With this evolved a number of theories ranging from a simple plane crash to alien abduction. The first theory is that the captain of the plane suffered from suicidal thoughts and depression. He eventually did become a prime suspect in the case due to the mounting evidence found in the investigation. The reason he was a prime suspect was due to the fact that the FBI found the exact route the plane took on his home flight simulator's computer hard drive. After further investigation by the FBI, as well as the Malaysian government, this theory turned out to be inconclusive because they couldn't prove that the pilot was involved. There were also reports that he had planned out the disappearance in a murder-suicide plot because he was apparently in a lot of debt, which he couldn't pay off. He would have messed with the oxygen supply in the plane's cabin and waited until the optimal time to crash the plane. If this is true, everyone would have been unconscious from the depressurization in the cabin, not knowing they were about to die except for the captain. The next theory is that the plane was hijacked, which was the first thought in everyone's mind and was even brought up by news outlets. After 9/11, this is the first theory that comes up in an event as largely broadcasted as this one. 2 men boarded the flight with stolen passports, which obviously raised suspicion. These passports were cross-checked with the stolen and lost travel documents list and were found to be on it, with nothing checked ever since they were first reported stolen. Additionally, and a somewhat probable theory, is that everyone in the plane lost consciousness and the plane ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. There were several reports stating that someone must have messed with the oxygen levels in the plane, going back to the hijack theory in that since everything is electronic, there must have been some cyber attack that caused that level of oxygen depletion. There are numerous reports that the plane was electronically hijacked. This is unlikely as modern planes can't be taken over remotely, with high security measures implemented inside the cockpit to ensure this doesn't happen. Of course, with rational theories also come outlandish ones, the most popular of them being an alien abduction and blame being put on the CIA. After the investigation was completed, an interim report was written that contained facts about the accident, rather than possibilities of what happened to the aircraft. An additional report was also written that indicated errors made by the Malaysian air traffic controllers in their limited efforts to communicate with the aircraft. There was heavy criticism of the Malaysian government and the airlines, particularly with the way they handled announcing information, with a lot of it being inaccurate, incomplete, and contradictory. Malaysian Airlines officially retired the flight number 370, replacing it with 318 beginning March 18, 2014. With severe financial losses due to the event, Malaysian Airlines were trying to salvage their company. The reputation fell, which didn't help with ticket sales. The airlines also had to suffer losses from the projection of compensating the victims' families. The condition for these families to receive payments was that the plane had to have been found or declared lost. This would then allow people to file civil cases against the airlines. Soon after, Malaysian Airlines began offering condolence payments to the families, but many next of kin rejected the payments. However, since the black box wasn't found, which contains the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, we don't know, and probably never will know, what happened to that flight internally, and what the final moments of that flight was. Which comes as a shock to so many people because in a digitally connected world, how a modern aircraft could simply just disappear doesn't make sense.